I'll start. My name is Rod, and I like to party.
So you mean whiskey?
What?
You're saying it weird.
Saying what weird?
All of it.
Where do you get off?
All right, welcome today. Glad you could be with us. My name is Robert Frazier, and we have a very special guest, one of my favorite people. He's been a huge inspiration to me. What I say, Dave, when I was planting, I read on the Verge that you and Alan wrote, and that was the foundation for everything that we did in terms of the network and our church plant. And so, wow. Whether you realize or not, I feel like that was the first time I had really figured out how to take what Alan had been talking about and make it really practical. So you take responsibility whether you want to or not for all the successes and or failures of my ministry.
I would love to own that. And also I think we ought to give props to Alan, because I do feel like part of my mission in life is to take the stuff that Alan talks about, and then some people don't understand and go like, oh, here's how we could do this.
Yes, and he needs it. He definitely needs that. All right. So Dave is the award-winning author, founding pastor of Chicago's Community Christian Church. It's a missional multi-site church, one of the most influential in America. He's also the visionary and international church planting movement, the visionary for the international church planting movement that I'm a part of, New Thing, and the president of the Exponential Conference. So
sounds exactly like what I sent you.
Yeah, that's exactly on daveferguson.org. That's what it says. So you got to start with that. And obviously, Dave, you got a lot going on. It's the week of Exponential, so we feel graced by your presence. Thank you for joining us.
Well, we got a great team, and I think I am so excited about next week. And it feels like with some of the stuff that's happening across the country, that I think there's just a different level of expectancy coming into Exponential. And I know, since we got some folks listening to us live right now too, I mean, if they could be praying about it, we've made a commitment not to try to make anything happen, but there is a part of it that's kind of like, well, if God's really moving in a different way across the United States right now, and his spirit is, and he wants to move it from kind of a worship to mobilize people. I mean, we got a lot of apostolic types. They're going to be gathering, over 5,000 in Orlando. And it kind of feels like, wow, maybe God wants to do something in those people's hearts and minds to really mobilize something different. So yeah, if you could be praying about that, that would be phenomenal. I'm excited.
Well, I think that the theme of Exponential this year, which is evangelism and what it looks like to kind of revamp and rethink evangelism in 2023 is a phenomenal starting point. So, movement happens in our hearts, and then it moves out through our lived action, being on mission. So I'm stoked about that. What are you, from a content standpoint, what are you most excited about for this week?
I mean, the lineup we have of speakers, I mean, we're fortunate at this point too. Most people, when we ask them to speak at Exponential, they say yes, and they're really excited about it. And so I'm really excited about that group of people. There was, I think it probably, maybe, I mean, if I was going to pick, I'm really excited in session 3. We have back to back Christine Kane and John Mark Comer. And one of the things I always, which is fun, is I always not only ask them to speak, a year or 2 years in advance, but then sometime a month or so beforehand, I'll go over what we asked them to talk about. So different than a lot of conferences, we actually have, like you mentioned, one big idea. And rather than kind of coming with their best conference talk, we asked them, hey, could you contribute to what we're trying to, make as a big idea, as an overall thrust, by talking on this part of, evangelism. And one of the things it's Christine King. She's so smart. She's so smart. I mean, the last 2 years she spoke, and I'll call her up and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. We really like to have you talk about. And she'll be like, well, that's pretty good. But have you ever thought about it? She ends up I'm going yes, no, you should do that instead. And so I in my conversation with her, I think particularly in post-Christian, postmodern kind of America, we have to take a much more relational approach to evangelism. And I've written about that in the Blessed Practice and other things. And I am gung-ho on that. But she gently pushed back. She said, but we still have to be intentional.
Yep.
And I thought that was so smart. So I'm really excited to hear how she takes kind of what we're really saying is, you know what, it can't be gospel just as proposition, gospel, you know, just as kind of even declaration, but it really relates with she's saying, yes, true, but we have to be intentional. So I'm excited to hear what she has to say about that. And then John Mark Comer after that. I think John Mark's one of the most, I think he's a really important voice in Christianity right now. I think he's both a practitioner because he's been a pastor, had been a pastor for so long, but also I think he's spends a lot of time in thought and study and prayer. And he's coming off his sabbatical. Actually, he's going to do like his whole practicing the way stuff. He's going to do a whole track on that.
Oh, really?
I know. And like, I mean, that's worth,
Right.
I
I know what track I'm doing now.
seriously, that's worth Exponential for, just like, oh, I'll do that and then go home. So,
Well, and just getting John Mark to show up is a coup because he protects his time. So like that's a gift that he's showing up for Exponential.
so
Yeah.
there's a couple things I'm really excited about.
Awesome. Well, as much as you've been a huge part of what's happened here with our story here in Boise and our church planting network, the city network. You've come out a couple of times. Actually, I think, is it 2 or 3 times you've been to Boise now?
3 times now. Yeah.
Yeah, 3 times, and we've had some really special moments, and I'm excited to get you back out here because there's a lot of new faces around the table that are engaging in the call.
I would love to.
I think we got about a dozen guys who are in process in church planting right now. Want to get you in front of those guys. Maybe we can do a webinar or something with them in the near future. But today I really want to dive in. So we rolled out the movement system at our last gathering with the city network because I think that it's taken what we've done. We started with church planting because we believed that driving at church planting would make us all focus on doing the right things. If we're thinking about multiplying and sending, then we have to do leadership development. If we want to do leadership development, we have to do disciple making.
Yep.
And if we want to do disciple making, we have to do proclamation of the gospel. Like that, like it moves us backwards. And it's like everybody's going, okay. Some churches like, we do okay with proclamation, but we don't know how to make disciples who make disciples. And so I'm stoked about I think I'm leading through my 3rd reproducing disciple making catalyst, and that's just been a gift. But I'd love to have you dive in and talk about the kind of the focus of the movement system and why you think it's vital for like the next stage of the new thing movement, and also just for church planting.
Yeah, and I would love to hear your thoughts too. After that, on like, hey, here's the part that's working, or even part that's not working. Then we need to tweak. I think one of the reasons I'm really excited about it, and I think it's really important for right now, is for those people listening who aren't familiar with New Thing, God's favor is, I don't know how it's expressed any other way than that, has really just been on New Thing. In that, I mean, it started like 16, 17 years ago, really, with us planting one church and a whole bunch of people moving from Chicago out to Denver. Fast forward, 5, 6 years into it, you got like a dozen churches, and all of a sudden, and that was the point where, and it's kind of like, again, we kind of accidentally did something right that God used. We said, hey, we got all these, 6, I think it was 12 churches at that point, 13. I said, well, what if we made it 2 different networks instead of one? And it really was just a bunch of friends trying to plant more churches together. And so we kind of started reproducing networks. And then after we did that, it was like we noticed that as we put churches in smaller networks, like 4 to 6, that it really accelerated the amount of churches they would plant. So, and part of the reason I'm telling this part of the story, and I'll get to the movement system, is what happened from there, really. I mean, now here we are, how many years into it? And last year we helped plant over 9,000 churches in 47 countries. So now it's and most of those are outside the United States. So, I mean, it's truly a global kind of experience. Well, one of the things that's awesome about being a global experience is you get to learn from the global church, the global body of Christ. And there are definitely different parts of the church in different parts of the world who have important things to offer us. And so, I mean, like, as I know, I mean, the church in India or the church in Africa, they do a much better job of discipling folks than we do in the North America. And so we need to learn from them. I think there are some things that are unique to the United States and North America about leaderships that we kind of get that we can share. And so there's different things. And so what we have in the movement system is, I think, New Thing had matured to a certain place globally that we're able to actually pull together people who are both thought leaders and practitioners and put together what we call the movement system based on first principles. These are first principles that work in any context. And as you kind of previewed there, what we have is there's basically five different reproducing catalysts. There's a reproducing disciples catalyst, and then there's a reproducing leader catalyst, then there's the reproducing church catalyst, and then there's the reproducing network catalyst, and then the reproducing movement catalyst. And we had kind of some bits and pieces of this, but I think this is the first time that we've been able to actually reach out to, all of our friends around the world and say, okay, what's the best stuff that we see working, and put it in a way that, a disciple of Jesus or a leader of it could be a small group or micro church or a missional community or of a church plant or a network leader can really grab a hold of it and go like, okay, here's how I can actually access this content and really kind of, I guess, to use more of a business term, but it does fit our conversation around movement. How do we actually scale it?
Yeah.
And I love the fact that, it really starts where you're starting with these the reproducing disciple catalysts. If you get that part right, okay, disciple making, you're gonna, unless you just kind of intentionally try to stop it, you will eventually move to this reproducing leaders and reproducing churches and even movements. Our network,
because when you have too many disciples, you have to do something. It forces you to. Yeah.
And that's kind of been, and there's some of that. I don't want to oversell, but there's some of that's happened with, I think, even with New Thing too.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about kind of like the ethos of New Thing, because I think the 4 R's of New Thing are an important piece of like why movement is happening. And so let's dive into the 4 R's, share the 4 R's, and then kind of walk through like how each piece was a part of the founding of the network and what it looks like today.
I mean, you opened our conversation talking about, Alan and I write on the Verge, and there are a lot of things. And for those, when we say Alan, we mean Alan Hirsch. There's a lot of things that I think myself, and I think Rob, you probably say this too, that we've learned from Alan. We feel a great debt of gratitude. And I remember, and this leads to the 4 R's, him talking about that movements are I don't know if he made up this term or not, but chaotic, because he's always making up words.
I love that word. Yeah.
And chaotic is this idea that there's chaos happening, but at the core, there is some order. And so, and the order is around kind of the vision and values. And so New Thing's very clear about its vision, okay? But then these 4 R's are also, we're very clear about, here's the 4 values. And if you want to be a part of New Thing, you could be a part of New Thing, but this is the thing that's constant. That vision and these 4 R's, which are our values, which are, the first R is relationship. And even I kind of briefly told the New Thing story at the beginning. And it started with, a bunch of people that are friends. Yep. And so when we talk about ours, it's really friends on mission. And like if I come out to Boise, and I may come out there and speak or do something, but in my head, it's like I'm coming out to see Rob, because he's a friend of mine, and we're on mission together, and I love what he's doing and who he is. And I think that's what Jesus had in that first group of disciples. I think that's who he intended the eternal community, the church, to be. And I think that's what we're really calling to, that first R is relationships. We're going to be friends on mission. And we assume the best, we trust each other. We just intuitively, show up with open hands, with one another.
Yeah. I think lots of organizations and networks see that as a secondary thing. But when I talk about our story here in Boise, it was built on these deep friendships. Like, it was 5 of my friends who were pastors. We had all done some level of youth or college or young adult ministry together. And so we had a ton of trust and care for one another, and we wanted to be together. And what I always say is that it's like you can build a network based on the friendships of a few, because people want to be a part of a tight-knit friendship. Like, it's like this magnetic sort of thing. And I also think that, like what Alan talks about, communitas, the idea that as we are in the trenches together doing it, it drives the deep connection so that it can't be torn apart by lack of time together, because we're knit together in the trenches. And I think that it's both like this essential thing to who we are, and also it's the result of what we do. It's like both and to me. So I love that it's at the center.
Yeah, and I think you just did a better job of describing it than I did. But I'm yeah, and I think and I think that is the thing that probably makes New Thing the most kind of magnetic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you were out here. We did an after party at our City Network conference last year, and we just had a bunch of friends at one of our pastors' like missional businesses, and there was like probably 40 or 50 people, and we all just had appetizers and drinks, and people stayed for 3 or 4 hours because they wanted to be together. And
Right.
that's the sort of like depth that we're talking about. This is not like oh, it's nice because he's, a part of this thing and he's over there. It's like when we're together, it's true friendship.
And part of the secret sauce is that's actually where things get done too.
Yep.
You know this too, and if those of you who haven't been there's some of that with Exponential too. I mean, because the Exponential, it kind of looks like a conference.
Yeah.
But I try to tell people every time they show up, no, this is not a conference. This is a community with a cause.
Yep.
And if the conference vehicle doesn't work, we're going to quit doing that and we'll do something else to help accomplish the cause. And the truth is, I mean, like John Mark Coleman will be awesome. Christine King will be awesome. But the best stuff that actually happens at Exponential is people hanging out, afterwards, going to dinner or getting a drink, or some people love smoking cigars. And I mean, they're just, and they're figuring out, hey, and because they're together and we're both passionate about it, you start strategizing and dreaming together. And
yeah,
that's what it looks like to be friends on mission. And
no question.
It's not like a job. It's like recess.
Yeah, don't tell my wife how much fun it is, but every year I tell her, like, I need to be at Exponential, and she's like, well, isn't it like the same content? And I go, well, no, it's not really the same content, but I go there because like I can avoid 200 Zoom calls over the year if I'm at Exponential for 4 days. Like I get like all this FaceTime and friendship and prayer for friends and like walking in like content and asking questions, and it's like things that would take like a whole year's worth of intentionality happen over 3 or 4 days. And then it spurs on movement and partnership, and all the things that I do in my life are built around those relationships. So it's much more than just, hey, we're going to get some content. It's deeper.
And it's funny. I mean, now let's go back to the church plant. You talked about how you started the City Network there with just a bunch of friends. I mean, in some ways, Community Christian, the church we planted, it was like we had 5 friends. I mean, and my wife Sue, literally, I mean, because she was teaching school and she'd had to drive an hour one way to get to school and then an hour back. And so basically she was kind of doing the fundraising by doing that. And she would, sometimes serious, other times jokingly, you're just going to play with your friends.
She's right, but it was important work too.
I can't deny it. It's like not a church, but it was. I mean, and we did, and we still do. We had a great time.
Mm-hmm. No question. All right. So relationship, we got that one down. Second R.
Relationship. And again, I think, I mean, that is probably, if I only had to pick one, I'd probably pick that one. But anyway, the second R is reproducing, and kind of we're reproducing at every level. And that speaks to the movement system, that we want to reproduce disciples, reproduce leaders, reproduce churches, reproduce networks, and even reproduce movements. And so that's what we're all about, the reproducing part. So relationships.
And I want to stop there real quick, because I think like a lot of church planting and church organizations are built on this like desire for size and status and control. But the sort of reproduction we're talking about is this open-handed reproduction. Like we believe that we reproduce disciples not so that we have more leaders in our church, but we reproduce disciples because they're going to make more disciples.
I think when we talk about reproducing at New Thing as one of the values, it is at every different level. And it's like each of those levels build upon the other. Because if you get the first one right, disciples, then you will get leaders, then you will get churches, and then you will get networks. And it's core to who we are. And
There you go. I think that's a piece of it, but then the reproduction is really about kingdom outreach, and it's about this open-handed kind of open system. So that's one of the things I love about New Thing is it's not you're not trying to build an episcopal system of control and like command. It really is this relational dynamic.
You've heard Patrick, who's our global director. Patrick always talks about no kingdom over castle, kingdom over castle.
Yep.
And the other thing it's worth saying too, I mean, that maybe is a little bit different about New Thing, and I hope we'll see more of this, is we don't really care what expression of ecclesia, what expression of church you're reproducing.
Yeah.
We kind of will sometimes put it in buckets. We don't care if it is macro, like it's a big church and it's a prevailing model, or if it's micro and it's a smaller church, or if it's meta, if it's something purely digital. We feel like all three of those and lots in between. If you can figure out what your simple ecclesiology is, you figure out what your simple ecclesiology, and by that I just mean what's the simplest definition for church, and we don't care how you express it, but then just make sure you're reproducing that, because that movement then eventually helps accomplish the mission.
Yeah, we talk about our radical minimum ecclesiology. What is what has to be a part for it to still be church, and how do you reproduce that? So
you got what I mean, if someone put you on the spot and go like I'm doing right now. So what is your minimal? How would you define it? What's your minimal ecclesiology? How would you define church?
Well, we borrow from others, but I think it's a group of people who have rhythms of like what we call up, in, and out. So deep connection with the Father, formation and community, and mission alongside God. If those three things are true, you have church. If you remove any one of those, you don't have church. Is that what's your simple ecclesiology, Dave? As you've been launching your network of micro church.
Yeah, I would language it probably a little different, but I think it's exactly the same. I would just say a community of people who are on mission together, where Jesus is Lord. And so, within there, you got the up, in, and out.
Yeah.
So community people on mission together, where Jesus is Lord. And I think, to me, if you got that, you have a church. And there are a lot of other things that even the pastoral epistles talk about and all those kind of things. But to me, if you got that, yeah, you got a church.
And there's other things that fit within those, but as long as you got those three things, you got the what Alan Hirsch would say is like the DNA, the missional DNA of the church is present, the apostolic DNA. Okay.
Too, I mean, just to speak to that briefly, I mean, like if we're having you work through our movement system, and we'll have you figure out, what is your minimal ecclesiology? We won't tell you what your minimal ecclesiology is. But we say you need to figure that out, because that's what you're going to reproduce.
And if they say, well, it's going to require robes and candles and big buildings, what's going to be your response?
Our response is, that's awesome, but that's going to be really hard to reproduce a lot of.
Okay, that's a good juke right there. You just sidestep the question. Okay, third R. Let's keep moving.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. So relationships, reproducing, and the third R is what we call residency, or sometimes we just say raising leaders. And so the idea of a residency is someone that you're apprenticing, and at the core of every kind of movements for great good or evil, honestly, there is some kind of apprenticeship. There's some kind of apprenticeship. And so that's got to be integral to everything that you're doing. So
whether you're a Sith Lord or a Jedi Master, you always have your apprentice.
So that's the third R. And then the fourth R is resources. And again, this speaks to what you talked about, just being open-handed with our resources. I was, Anthony Delaney, one of our New Thing friends over in Manchester. I was on a call with him this morning, and he was talking about, both some of the content that he's creating around disciple making, and really even kind of on mostly disciple making. And he wants to figure out ways to share that open-handedly, but also even some dollars and cents kind of stuff that he wants to do. So that's kind of who we are.
Excellent. Well, we did the infomercial part, which is like, I want people to know what the movement system is. And if you want to hear more about that, please reach out. We're going to be, we're in the middle of a Reproducing Disciples catalyst right now. There could be another group that's going to start in late April. And so if you'd like to sign up for that, let me know. And we'll also put a link to the movement system website from New Thing there. And you can also join. There's a community in Mighty Networks if you want to get more connected with New Thing, hear what's happening within there. You get discounts to Exponential, some good things. So join in with the New Thing conversation. Now I want to pivot for the next 10 or 15 minutes and just talk more generally about church planting.
Okay.
And I'd love to start with what excites you about the next generation of guys who are stepping into leadership, gals who feel called, and like, what are you seeing that you're excited about?
I mean, I was down in Dallas in December with the Barna Research Group, and you've probably seen the stuff by now too. But I mean, they're talking about Gen Z, and they call Gen Z the open generation.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that really excites me about that generation is that they're more open to spiritual things than than millennials, than busters, or than boomers. And that I think there's something happening in the United States right now that I don't remember feeling in my lifetime, and it's probably a little too early to say, but things that are happening like at Asbury and otherwise, I think there is this openness.
Yeah.
But I think there also is a different level of desperation too.
Yeah.
Where in that, that 18 to 29-year-old range, there's a, coming out of COVID, also there's a lot of research the last 10 years just shows a spike in struggles with mental health. I think there's a different level of desperation. And I think that openness and desperation just really makes it ripe for God's Spirit to do something. And so you have that whole generation. And I think,
would you say they're hungry for connection? Like as an isolated generation, mental illness, anxiety, depression, all that's so deeply tied to how isolated they are.
I think so. Yes,
Yeah.
Absolutely. And if you if that's this generation, and then church leaders are coming out of that too. What I also see, and I think this is going to challenge Exponential, is I think they're longing for something that is not just quantitative but qualitative.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, you've heard me at Exponential. And for those who aren't familiar, I mean, Exponential, we have this mission called the 16% mission, and that we would love to see 16% of all churches across the United States become reproducing or multiplying churches. Because we feel like that could change the landscape of North America. And I still think that is a tipping point. I think that's absolutely right. And I think that needs to continue to be our mission. But what I'm discovering, and I'm also feeling myself, is I think a lot of us are going like, okay, yeah, 16%, but 16% of what?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
well, that's been a part of our mission from the beginning, is we believe church planting is the way to get the church healthy. Because I don't know if a lot of existing churches can make shifts towards health, but I think we can start healthier churches, and we can change the conversation. But that's what it takes. It's harder.
Do me and our listeners here a favor too. So draw the line that's kind of, I heard you just, it was dotted, but kind of make it a solid line between church planting and church health. Why is church planting the way to church health?
Well, I think there's two pieces to it. The first is whoever gets the ear of church planters and gets to help shape their calling and the trajectory of their ministry will get to determine and help them move towards the sort of kingdom ethos we want to see in the church. The true church being what is meant, healthy leaders who have dealt with their nonsense and are working through all of, the little mega church pastor that's screaming in their ear. And, if we can launch healthy churches, then the church gets healthier over time, because there's no church makes it more than a couple generations. And so every generation, we're recreating the church, and church planting is the way to set that stage. But I think there's a second piece to it. When church plants show up in neighborhoods, older churches start realizing that they have to change, and it creates some holy discontent around them, and realizing that if they want to reach the next generation, they're going to have to shift what they do and what they value. And I think that's a good thing. So those are the two ways that I think about health and planting.
Yeah, and I guess back to your question too about why am I excited about the next generation? I think because what you're talking about is exactly what I think that next generation is looking for. I think their eyes still light up when you talk. If you're an entrepreneur or an apostolic gift, their eyes still light up when you talk about movement and multiplication. But they probably, them and their friends have been burned enough. They're going like, yes, but what qualitatively is it going to be like?
Well, they have questions about institution and authority that
Yes.
the last generation saw as a symbol of strength. This generation sees as a threat. And so we have to de-emphasize authority and emphasize empowerment, and at the same time, like, give them rails to go, okay, how could I create, like, and what I tell young people is, like, stop deconstructing and help us create something that's worth doing. Like we need you to help us build something.
What are we going to reconstruct?
Yeah. So, okay. I love that. What concerns do you have about church planting in North America right now? Like, where are there danger signs for you?
I think there is a lot of deconstruction happening around the prevailing model, the Constantinian kind of model of church, which the launch in church planting parlance, the launch large model. And I think that's happening, but I think, and even as we sometimes try to go like, okay, here's what's wrong with this, here's how we need to do things different. There's still this framework that's like stuck in our brain that, it's a paradigm. And so I guess what concerns me is the paradigm. How do we escape the paradigm? And again, hear me, I lead a large church. I lead a large multi-site church. Okay. And I love this church, and I love the people, and I love what we're getting to do. And I feel like we're making a difference in the community and making a difference in people's lives. So I'm not really so much knocking that. Partly I am, but as like, there's still a paradigm, I think, that we get stuck in that keeps us from being everything that Jesus meant for us to be. And
well, don't you think that's the economic model? Like, the problem is the way that we think about church funding and mission funding is built around efficiency. We get the most people in the building with the least amount of inputs. Therefore, we have the most amount of money to then spend on staff and mission, which is itself,
and to pay my salary.
Yeah, well, which that's a key piece of it. And I mean, I'm coming from a very different standpoint. Like, our entire team, there's 6 people on our staff, and we're all part-time bivocational. I chose that as a starting point in what I have pursued our entire calling and plant. And, we're doing micro church network. So it's like, there's all these, there's a different economic model that requires.
Talk about that just for a second. Did you do that because you had to, and then it worked, or you did it because you wanted to, with a hunch that it would work and help you escape some of the economic pressure to kind of stick with the prevailing model?
Well, so I'm a pastor's kid, which means I have, there's many pieces of this. First is like, economic insecurity as a kid, like, was, a piece of that. So taking that away from my ministry actually gave me freedom in a lot of ways to say, like, it's not about making money, it's about serving the King. Like, I needed that distance. I needed to take away the employee-employer relationship between me and my people. Like, that gave me a different
Freedom,
sort of moral authority and freedom that I couldn't have pursued otherwise. They would have looked at what I was doing outside of the church and said, we're not paying you for that. And when you have a bivocational model, it gives you freedom to serve out of generosity rather than out of obligation. It made it so that everybody had to own what we were doing, because they couldn't say, we're paying you to do that. Right. Like, you'd be like, no, you're not paying me to do that. And, I'm not, like, my pastoral gift is probably like 3rd or 4th. And so I need the church to lean in, and thankfully, because we've pushed pastoral care down to the micro church level, that's not a big part of my time. And it happens in an organic relational connecting point. So yes, it was by design from the beginning. And now we're at a spot where they really need me more, and I'm trying to figure out how do I do what I'm doing, and how do I economically make my life work. And that's, a question for me and my therapist and my wife to work through, Dave.
I think it would be a good exercise for anybody who is a paid church leader to begin to imagine, okay, what would you do with your church if tomorrow they told you they weren't going to pay you?
Is your call still on your life? Is it still valid even if there's no money tied to it?
Because I think wouldn't it make you first think differently about what you said, your call. I think it also make you think differently about whether it's your programs or your strategy and tactics.
Yeah. It requires you to think differently about
Help you break out of that, or at least begin to expand out of that paradigm.
Well, if you have less money and less time, you get really really focused on what matters, right? Like if you have, and this is what happens with church planners all the time, is they've got 40 hours a week or maybe 60 hours a week, depending on their, the type of boundaries they have. Right. And a lot of them will spend 20 or 30 hours a week working on a sermon.
A lot of them. Oh my gosh. Yes. It's unbelievable.
I got to say, like, it's wasted time. I mean, like, seriously, like if we're getting down to it, I don't think Jesus was spending 40 hours a week thinking about how he was going to write a sermon. I think he was living out the gospel and, workshopping his content with his disciples. And then he was training and giving vision in these larger communities. But like, we put more than half of our time as communicators into this 30. And I was at a mega church before I planted, and when I preached, because it was in front of 4,000 people, you do 30 hours, 40 hours a week of preparation and practice. And then you do it 4 times, there's all those pieces to it. And I got to tell you, I don't think it was significantly better than what I do now with 5 or 6 hours. Yeah. I think that for church planners, they have to ask different questions when they're bivocational. And sometimes there's a ditch on both sides of this road. There are Bible guys who get out of ministry because they can't make their life work because of finances or time, or they're demanding that they be this mega church pastor on 10 hours or 15 or 20 hours a week. And then over here, you've got guys who wouldn't do ministry if they didn't make $70,000 a year because that's their profession.
Right.
For me, once I settled in my heart that I'm going to make disciples the rest of my life, now it's just a matter of like making it work. Okay, what's this season for? How am I participating in God's work? How am I raising up the next? Because if Jesus spent 90% of his time raising up 12 teenage boys to lead the next generation, and that was the master plan of evangelism, as Robert Coleman would say, I think Jesus had this radical genius that we don't believe in. We think that we have a better way of doing it. I think, yeah, we're getting off in my tangents now, but
well said.
Okay, I got a couple more questions before we go. I don't want to overstep the generous time you've made. The week of Exponential, our podcast made it. I got 4 quick questions. These will be lightning questions for you. Okay. What book are you reading right now that you're just digging?
I just recently finished Mark Sayers. What's it called? Presence.
His new one. Yeah.
Non-anxious presence. Which, and actually, I'm going to be in Australia in April. Or
great.
I don't know, April, one of them.
When are we getting Mark at Exponential? That's the next question.
I know. Well, I'm going to hang out with him some while I'm there.
Good.
I would encourage, everybody to check it out. It's a little bit frustrating because it's kind of like I want to take that book and I want to go like, okay, now here's the practical how-tos at the end of it.
Well, did you read let's see, Disappearing and Reappearing Church?
What is it?
Disappearing Church and then Reappearing Church that he wrote? He gets into more of that because he sees non-anxious presence as like the kingdom.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
So that's where I need to go next then. All right.
Yeah, it's good. Okay. Who would you want to meet if you could meet anybody today? It doesn't have to be a church person. It can be, you probably meet all the church people you want, but who would you want to meet?
Who do I want to meet if I could meet anybody today? Wow. The person that comes to mind, this is lame, is Giannis. I think he seems like such an interesting dude.
I mean, the Greek Freak. I like that.
I mean,
He's an interesting guy. Yeah.
He's playing in the NBA right now, but he's also got a great story and seems to be
Yeah.
super generous with just a generous spirit. I don't know where he is spiritually.
Did you see him call out KD this week? Basically going
What
like,
did he do?
he's like, basically like, buddy, you keep searching for a super team, but if we hang out, I'll teach you how to make your team great around you. I was like, that's some flame. That's fire right there.
I mean, the dude went to Milwaukee and made it happen.
If you can win in Milwaukee, you can do anything. That's the reality.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so stoked about the NBA playoffs this year, man. There's so many teams. Okay, anyways, we don't want to go in the NBA. Who would you want to meet from history if you can meet anybody?
Oh, so
Other than Jesus. Well, let's take that one off the board. You've already met him.
okay, hold on. You got, see the first. If it's supposed to be so, if it's supposed to be like lightning round, I'm supposed to give you the first thought. This is first person who came to mind is Pistol Pete Maravich.
Basketball's on. Well, it's March. You know, it's a basketball time.
I watched a kind of an old video of his life and stuff. The dude, I mean, he still, I think, holds the record for average or the most points in a college career, and that was the 3-point line.
That's crazy.
Or the 3-point line. And if you go back and look at some, I don't know if you played hoops or not. I played hoops as a kid, and I loved it. But I mean, he invented almost all the kind of the ball handling drills that people still use. So,
have you seen some of those old videos where he's like dribbling behind his back, like at lightning speed, just like pop, pop, pop?
Or where he's dribbling. Yeah, he would be riding his bike around town. He's dribbling. He's driving the car. He's dribbling outside the car.
Talk about handles, man. Yeah. Okay, Pistol Pete. I love that both of them end up being basketball. I mean, it would have been a sport for at least one of those. Last thing, what would be if you give one piece of advice to a church planner who's in process, what would you tell them?
Well, I think this is, I think fundamental to leadership is you reproduce who you are. Yeah. And I think that both has a qualitative and a quantitative. So, I mean, if you want the people, if you're a guy and you want the dads in your church to be great dads, do your best to be a great dad, because you're going to reproduce that. If you want them to have a healthy marriage, have a healthy marriage, because you're going to reproduce who you are. So never, because in a lot of us that are in the church planning world, we are kind of wired more apostolic. We are a little more driven. Okay. Yep. And all your efforts to do awesome things, don't forget, you're going to reproduce who you are even more than what you want. So that's what I'd say.
Well, I think there's a corollary to that, which is if you want to become something, find somebody who is those things. And too often as church planners, we look around and go, I've got to become this in a vacuum because I have to be the guy who, shows everybody how to do that. But too often, like, church planners aren't willing to go, you know what? I got to go find somebody who knows how to do that and teach me and disciple me. Yeah. I like that. All right. Well, man, thank you so much for some time. I'm excited about the new thing, house party next week. Those are always some of my favorite days. We'll be together, and I'll see you in Orlando, man.
Got it. See you next week.
All right. Take care.